word. Fiqh is Arabic word. Okay. Jurisprudence. What is jurisprudence? You're looking into an understanding of the law. So based on X, I could derive a law or a command. Okay. And I could put it down and I could say, this is forbidden. If you do that, you're going to be fined X amount. Okay? So a lot of the Muslim jurisprudence that dealt with environmental issues, it dealt with issues of water, irrigation, animal husbandry, crops, and other things. Historically, when we talk about farming communities or trading communities, and they're dealing with these things. So it dealt with a lot of those issues. But now, when we're going to look into the current crisis, a lot of it is old school thought, okay? And I would have to say, this is what I believe, okay? A lot of it, for example, the concept of hima and haram and harim, okay? These were the two concepts where you were told to conserve land, okay? And a person, for example, if I bought a land, if I had 10 acres right outside Middletown, and it was forested area, I could just simply put down that this isn't a sanctuary. I want to conserve this land, and nobody's allowed to touch it. Okay? And I could, I do not have to pay taxes on this because, it's an open space basically. So these were the concepts that were known within Muslim world, with the time of the Prophet. He actually called Mecca, the city, and Medina sanctuaries, where not even a leaf should be broken for any purpose, or any animal be hunted or hurt or anything like that. Okay, so the idea of concept of sanctuaries, in Muslim world it existed 1400 years ago. So these were the concepts that were known to the Muslim world, but unfortunately all of that has fallen apart because the Muslim world is in chaos. Okay, to describe not all of it, but a lot of it. Okay, but to come back to Western ethics, these are the concepts that are still ongoing, and conservation, open space, to conserve resources. All these concepts are known, and they have a Western balanced view as well. Okay, there's something in both cultures that is there. But to go forward, we have to come up with an environmental ethics that is more practical than those issues that we have been dealing in the past. Okay, because now we're not dealing with just the water issues. We're talking about the air. Okay, we're talking about ozone layer being depleted. And if it's going to cause cancer, it's going to cause cancer to everybody. It doesn't really matter, rich or poor. Okay, animals or human beings. So how do we look at that? The melting of the polar ice. How is it going to affect? It's going to affect all of us, because as the sea level rises, those people who live along the coastal areas, their houses are going to go under water. Okay, so like the biggest complaint actually in New Jersey is, do you know what's the biggest natural threat in this area? The disaster. It's not the earthquakes. That's California. What would it be? It's not the birds attacking us. We're attacking birds. Huh? What's that? Air pollution? It's there, but we're not dying of air pollution as of lately, right? So, unless you smoke or something, and I do mean it. It's actually the flooding that's happening. And how does it happen? It happens because people build, and they create all this impervious area, and the water doesn't go down under the soil how it's supposed to be naturally, right? And it gets recycled. But we simply pipe it, and it goes down to the stream, okay? And the streams, what we have done, instead of streams meandering left and right and going back and forth, right, over an area, and the water spreads out, and when you meander, right, when you ski, you don't go straight down. You try to go, zigzagging, right, meandering, because that slows down your pace. Otherwise, if you go straight, you go on, it's an uncontrollable act, right? So that's the reason why you don't want the water go straight down. But what we have done is we've put ditches and dikes, and we have made dams, and we have put the channels straight, right, piped it all. So now it goes so fast that if there's a flash flood, right, if it rains for, few hours, right, half a day, and all this water is coming together, piped, the towns or the areas that are closer to the coastal areas, because all the rivers are going to the ocean at the end, okay, this is the water cycle. Those towns are flooded with water because the way it used to be before we built all these areas, on all those forested or put these farmlands, is that this water was picked up by the trees, or it was slowed down in pace because of the meandering rivers, okay, or streams. But now, this water has nowhere to go down, so it simply runs this way, parallel, horizontal, right? And then it comes down so fast, and there's too much water that it floods these coastal cities. Okay, and that's part of what we know. But coming back to the ethics here, so these are the scholars, and they're talking about a lot of it has to do with the past. And I think what we need to do, and this is one of the difficulties of the Islamic environmental ethics or any ethics, is that we have to deal with the future. And how do we do that? Next one, please. He's also another intellectual Muslim writer and author who talked about a lot of the environmental ethics, and these are his works. But I want to go on to the next point, inshallah. Development of environmental ethics. So this is what we talked about. Collection of historical cases and fiqh. Next one, please. Okay, and this is what I'm looking at. A lot of what we are hearing and reading, that many scholars or many dissertations or many papers that are out in the environmental ethics journals, they're repeating there's a redundancy, a second point, on environmental ethics in Islam. They're talking about the same principles. What is Islamic environmental ethics? It's this. But this has been talked about by all these scholars 40 years ago, right? Why do we keep repeating these things? We have to go on to how does it relate to the reality? And that's the first point, textual then practical. It tends to be more textual. So there's this verse that has been quoted that God says, do not destroy the balance, okay? The mizan. Or do not, cross the limits. Now, how is that practical when we're going to look into everyday business? So let's say you're the head of the EPA or the state DEP, Department of Environmental Protection. How does, and you're, in a Muslim country and everybody's listening to you and they want to come and kiss your hand or whatever the case is, right? Hug you, and then they want to get your opinion about how we're going to protect the environment, right? And you have this verse. You say, well, God says, do not destroy the balance. But how do we implement that verse? Okay? And that's where we have to be practical. Okay? That's where we run into problems, because a lot of people are simply coming up with theories, and it's difficult to put them and ground them in reality and make them more pragmatic and practical. So principles are elaborated, often utopian in nature. Okay, God wants us to, for example, one of the concepts that talked about is that if we protected the city as the messenger of God he talked about, or Prophet Muhammad, he talked about the sanctuary, then the Mecca and Medina, those two cities, would look just like how they looked 1,400 years ago. Okay, so one of the authors, he wrote about that. But we have to remember that people are living in these cities and these societies. And there are needs of people. We just can't look at the environment and ignore the needs of people. And when we ignore the needs of people, then we run into problems. It becomes too utopian. One of the scholars, he talked about, Western scholars, he says, if I see a snake, that's, or if in a desert, or if I see a person dying in a desert, I would rather save the snake. And this is just extreme that he was talking about. And he says he would save the snake than the person. And the reason why, because not too many people, there isn't there's sufficient amount of people, but there aren't sufficient amount of snakes out there. So we should be protecting. So, it just goes into extreme, what are you talking about? This is kind of out of the world scenario where, yes, environmental ethics really should be something positive, but not something that is